All right, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Just starting with an acknowledgement of country, the Farmers for Climate Action acknowledges the traditional owners of the land on which we work and the traditional owners of the land our guests and speakers are joining us from. I am joining you from Arabana country in northern South Australia, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. So we're in the normal Zoom meeting mode this time, so it's a little bit different to some of our bigger webinars. So active, and feel free to leave your cameras on, just keep yourself on mute. And I'll get Helen to find out how she wants, when for you to ask questions, but we encourage a lot of questions and sort of, discussion on the topics. And that's why we keep these webinars a bit smaller than some of our other bigger ones, like the El Nino we did a few weeks ago. So we really encourage discussion. And if there's questions, that you don't get to, or you think of after, I'll put my email in the chat, so you can feel free to send those through to me as well. Now, majority got a lot of familiar faces and names out there, but for those of you that haven't had a lot to do with FCA so far, Farmers for Climate Action grew out of a meeting of frustrated farmers in the Blue Mountains in 2015 around wanting stronger climate policy in Australia. And we now represent over 8,000 farmers across Australia and across all industries, which is really, really exciting. Our mission is to influence Australia to adopt strong economy-wide climate policies and realise a prosperous and sustainable future full of opportunity for farmers and farming communities. And one of the ways that we do that is through farmer education and capacity building. And so that's where these webinars fall into. And we have a lot of farmers out there that are really interested in the holistic management principles. And so that's why we've teamed up with Helen at Holistic Management Co-op to give you a bit more of a tailored webinar. And that's why we invited the farmers that we knew were interested in this sort of thing, as well as a lot of our climate leaders are also here. So I really appreciate that. Thank you very much for coming. And as I said, just keep yourself on mute, but fine to keep your videos on. So we're really lucky to have Helen here today. So Helen is the new CEO of the Australian Holistic Management Co-op. She has extensive experience in decision-making, policy-making, and uses those skills to facilitate better decision-making on farm and how that can affect your farm business as well. The Australian Holistic Management Co-op have a really interesting program called the Ecological Outcome Verification, which is I won't go into what it is actually, because that's what Helen's going to do. But we're looking at, how that can help you with your environmental, social, and governance goals on farm and those sorts of areas, as well as the co-op being a great place for farmers that are interested in this stuff to join and network with other farmers as well. So that's a very brief intro, and I'll pass over to you now, Helen.
Thanks, Helen, very much. Thank you. Great to be here, and thanks everyone. I see some familiar faces and some new faces, so I'm looking forward to the conversation that we end up with after I've done a few slides. So yeah, very happy to answer questions maybe at the end, so that we'll just get through the deck and then we can go from there. So firstly, so I'm based in Warwick, which is 2 hours west of Brisbane, and we're on a farm and we do grass-fed beef and manage holistically and moving animals around, etc. And so yeah, and my new role was as CEO of the Australian Holistic Management Cooperative. I've been sort of in since the 3rd of July, so it's been a a learning curve and of all the aspects of the cooperative that are currently underway. So looking forward to just outlining a bit more of information, particularly about the ecological outcome verification process. My background is I'm a holistic management educator and have been since 2003, and have been using the process as well as educating people since that time as well. So we'll move into the Australian Holistic Management Cooperative. So in the global context, I guess we have, there's an enormous number of hubs. So Australian Holistic Management Cooperative is part of the Savoury Network with the Savoury Institute and one of the 54 global hubs across the world. So, and the hubs are working with farmers to help keep improving the 21.7 million hectares of land currently being managed holistically. Hubs globally also with the education in holistic management, but also supporting them with the implementation of those practices and the holistic management process. As well as that, we're rolling out the ecological verification outcome process and the protocol. And it's a holistic approach. The EOV, we call it, is a holistic approach to verifying the ecological health of our land, and it's really the landscape function we're monitoring. And it's really from grassroots, so farmers are driving it and come to us wanting to do the ecological monitoring on their farms. And then they can, with the report, get an understanding of what they need to do differently in order to keep improving their landscape function. And so we're helping with that process, and that's probably going to be developed further, from where it is at the moment. So we're developing that. And then it's ultimately about continuous improvement. And then farmers who increase their ecological health of their land through the EOV process are then eligible and receive a verification and are then eligible to access the land to marketing strategic supply chain. And so the global supply chain connects the buyers to regenerative landholder products and landholders that have got the EOV seal. So that's how that works. Since 2018, the Australian Holistic Management Cooperative has been focused on developing the EOV process. And in the 22-23 season, we've monitored 308,000 hectares, and by March next year, it'll be 618,000 hectares. We've got two other projects. One is the Dawson Catchment in Queensland with 24 or 21 farms, and then there's also the USA Deckers Ugg Boot company that are supporting 43 farms in regards to the EOV monitoring. The AHM Co-op itself we're looking to widen its impact by growing membership services, EOV marketing opportunities, further educational training, and in holistic management. As it is a values-based decision-making process, there's a real opportunity to really encourage people to engage with the decision-making process for their ESG reporting and requirements. It sort of wraps that up nicely, and I'll talk about that a bit later. We want to offer farmers and organisations managing holistically support, and also the educators, the Australian holistic management educators that we have in Australia. They will be also a very valuable resource. So the national activity then is they're all the pins of all the land that is currently being monitored by EOV at the moment and through the co-op. So yeah, there's a bit of a footprint, and that's growing regularly. So I guess why the whole regenerative notion, okay, and I guess I know that the regenerative agriculture, there's some people have mixed feelings about that word, it seems, but I guess what we want to do is ultimately moving from degenerating, and then sustainable is just keeping the status quo ultimately, but then to actually get improvements, we need to be able to regenerate. So I guess that's where the essence of the word regenerate is coming from, is trying to make it just a bit better than just sticking with the sustainability. The sustainability is just using what we've already got better, but maybe we could actually improve it with some regenerating and regenerative principles. So I guess that's where we're trying to be sustainability is the bridge, but we're trying to help farmers be that next step over the other side of the bridge. So what to monitor? So we have we really need to accept that the ecosystem processes are fundamental. And that with the 4 ecosystem processes are the water cycle, the energy flow, mineral cycle, and community dynamics. And with that, we get a highly functioning landscape. So I think it's really key to make sure we think about that. And if you think about those 4 ecosystem processes as a tetrahedron with an equal-sided pyramid, you can't, if you increase the water cycle, improve the water cycle, you're improving everything. If you also reduce the water cycle's capacity, then you're going to reduce everything, every other process capacity as well. So we can't isolate these processes. They're actually all connected, and one will affect one. Whatever's happening with one will affect the other. So I think keeping that in mind is actually really critically important when we start to shift the outcomes we're getting in regards to our landscape management. So by keeping those in mind, that they're all connected, is a key point. So if we're monitoring the ecosystems, we have to then understand that there are actually two different types of environments in the world. One is seasonal and dry, like potentially with dry periods, and the other one is humid and damp. And I guess the next slide is about the tools and the consequences of that and how it impacts our ecosystem processes. So I just want to, it's a very quick, and we can certainly go through this a little bit more in questions, but really in our toolbox. So if you think about us as land managers, we've got a toolbox and we've got technology, time, and living organisms. So time sort of plays out as either, managed time with our grazing planning, etc., or unmanaged time when we tend to lock, some policies like, lock up state forests or lock up land, or we unmanage land. We don't manage it, we just put a fence around it. And so when we're in a seasonal dry environment, then living organisms is the third major compartment in the toolbox, and that's large and small. So that's both grazing animals, right down to the microorganisms of soil and activity, that minutiae and the soil food web and all those things. So those 3 key compartments of our toolbox. And obviously technology is huge, and as humans we love technology, and we usually try and we'll default to technology because it's quick, and if we want to fast track something. But when we talk about technology and the use of technology, I really like to just ask those questions. Is that technology keeping the soil covered? Is it solving the root cause of the problem? Because often technology we use, and it's actually just we need it quickly because we need to band-aid something. And so it's actually making sure that we're dealing with the root cause of the problem before we use that technology. And is it enhancing our biological activity in our soil? So I think technology is huge and enormous, and very useful. And all these tools are fair game. Like, they're all in there for a reason. Like, you can use whatever you like and whatever combination you like. But if we just being a little bit more mindful about the consequences of using those tools in these different types of environments. So for the seasonal dry environment, technology, again, we've got to keep the ground covered because it's very hard to get covered ground, and covered soil is pretty well the point where the rubber hits the road, and whether or not we're going to start enhancing the ecosystem processes or we're starting to degenerate them. And in humid and damp, it's hard to create bare ground, so technology is there, but again, you can still impact. Technology is anything man-made, so it can be artificial inputs, it can be whatever. And so it's asking that question: are we solving the root cause? Are we enhancing the soil biology and the soil function with the use of that technology? But yeah, it's very hard to create, bare ground in a damp environment. And with that damp environment, I'm talking about the Mullaney's, the hinterlands, places that have humidity or damp, moisture all through the year at ground surface, at soil surface. So it's not necessarily rainfall. It's actually more about soil moisture throughout the year at soil surface. And then the seasonal dry is when we have a growing season, a rainy season, and then we have a period of dry, which is 2/3 of the world's surface and also most of Australia. So it's a fairly significant area that we need to consider if we're going to when we're managing our land. If you fall into that category of of a more seasonal dry environment. And then we have the time. So time, we like, and I've really made this very much an agricultural process, example. But the planned grazing, and whether or not we plan our grazing or we set stock, it's all a function of time, not numbers. So it's the how, not the cow. So we really need to make sure that in a seasonal dry environment, we are planning our grazing, because that process of planning and allowing adequate recovery ensures that we are enabling those grasslands to regenerate. If we set stock and we keep animals in the same place for a long period of time, that's when it starts to degenerate, and we start to eat out species by species, plant by plant, and other things start, pioneer species to come back in, etc. So there's a whole process there of understanding that time. And then the planned grazing, again, in a humid and damp environment. So it actually enhances the diversity of plants, and set stocking will reduce the diversity. So, look at where, in England or in those more humid environments, animals can stay on the same piece of country for a long time, and it's still got grass wall to wall. But the actual quality of that grass and or the actual diversity of those species in that paddock will have reduced down to the one that can tolerate that continuous grazing. And I mean, I always also use the example up here in Killarney, just up is like a hinterland, and they grow potatoes. And I mean, in that humid, damp environment, they can grow tomatoes and harvest them. So there's bare ground, but literally like 4 weeks later, you go up there and it's wall to wall kikuyu. So it's that recovery of that, of that bare ground, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's, vibrant or anything, because it's still only got one species. But I'm just trying to make the point that the difference between that humid environment and that seasonal environment and that bare ground story. So then we have unmanaged time, and that's when we, if we go to the state forest and we put a fence around a piece of country, it actually ultimately, if we're doing it in the dry seasonal environment, it will actually look like it's sort of recovered maybe 3 to 5 years in, but then long term it actually reduces biodiversity. And I think we've probably all been through state forests, which are actually just a desert of trees and really not much going on. I've had the experience where I've driven up to the boundary of a state forest and gone over and before I've got to the boundary, I've hit, there's been all this roo activity. I've gone into the state forest and gone in there for 30 kilometres, then come out the other side and nothing happening in the forest. But then as soon as I get out the other side, more activity of roos and whatever else. So, why aren't the roos in the park, in the forest? Because there's really not much going on there. So those are the things that we've got to be mindful of. And then the increased biodiversity, when we actually don't manage time. If we lock country up in those humid environments, it goes back to a forest and or rainforest. So it is actually really functional. And then the living organisms, large and small. So again, it's about the time, not the numbers of animals. It's about making sure we're properly grazing, using the tool of grazing in the best possible way through plan graze. And then also in a properly managed grazing in a non-brittle environment or the humid, damp environment, it equals more diversity. So we get more diversity and we get a robustness in the pasture. So just in regards to the grasslands, and this is just a very brief snapshot, obviously, but I guess the key point I want to take away here is the fact that there are two very different environments, and they are we need to really be very aware of the consequences of the tools that we apply in each of those environments, because we will get different outcomes and different results. So, and if you look at the policies that are being made, this very fundamental information and understanding the consequences of those tools when we apply certain things are not clear. Like the policymakers aren't aware of this particular difference and the consequences of the tools in those different landscapes. So I'm just flagging that as an area of development and growth that we can start encouraging policymakers to understand this at the very point, because if we understand this, then all of a sudden some of our policy outcomes can actually be better, and we can start moving forward. So then I guess if we actually also understand this, that where did we get most of our farming knowledge in Australia? It came from the eastern seaboard of America and or England, and they are both humid, damp environments. So we've applied tools in certain ways to our landscape, to a dry seasonal environment, but we've applied them in the way that you'd apply them in a humid damp, and they obviously got results in that humid damp environment. But the opposite has been, and now we're, well, not necessarily direct opposite, but less than optimal results of how of what we're seeing. So now we need to shift the way in which we use these tools in our more seasonal dry environments to get a better, to get a different outcome, a better outcome. So what gets measured gets improved. And so if we're looking at we have to look at, and we understand that healthy land equals healthy people equals healthy businesses. And I'll just add that to, actually, these are the three components of ESG: environment, social, and governance. And I've put in there healthy business equals decisions. So we need to make better decisions to get better governance. And people, we need to consider people to ensure that the people's well-being are taken care of, their involvement is included, and also their social, just that their actual well-being, their personal health. And that comes from a really healthy, vibrant environment. So with that whole idea of the ESG, we kind of are pretty good at monitoring. We have been monitoring our financial health. Like, you think about the reporting we do on our finances, we do the reporting on our own personal well-being with our smartwatches or all those guides about our own personal health. But also there's certainly been improvements more generally and globally, and a bigger picture of people's position in the workforce and how they're looked after in the workforce and their considerations. But let's actually have a look at how we can monitor environments, because that's the area that is pretty important and it's a key part of that whole ESG component. So the EOV, Ecological Outcome Verification, is a scientific peer-reviewed protocol. So it has been put together by there's a guy. Anyway, there's been multiple scientists, multiple people have put this through the Michigan University, and it has been, what they've done is they've drawn from all the experiences from multiple papers over the last, however they've really just done a scan of all monitoring that has been put together over, in the last 50 to 100 years, and they have put together this ecological outcome verification from all that research and all those papers, and it's driven by the producers from the bottom up, with outcomes verifying the ecological health, and then rather than being a top-down practice-based benchmark where you sort of, are you doing this, are you doing that, are you doing that, and you just sort of tick the box. So this is really getting down into the dirt and parting the leaves of the plants and having a look at bare ground, whether or not things are functioning. And there's lagging and leading indicators, and I'll show you briefly, some of those things that we're monitoring. And they're monitoring the outcome of the management decisions and practices. So we're really monitoring that outcome of that. And then it's also context specific. So given it's holistic management, it's based on holistic management, we're very, very keen to ensure that not only have we considered the ecoregion, but we've included that human and seasonal environments in our overlay of the parameters for those environments. And then the farmer's context as well. So what is the capacity of the farmer to make the changes or to implement what needs to happen to get those better outcomes? And it's about them making the decisions, using the tools to get the best possible outcome as well. So that's why, and that's the essence of the ecological outcome verification. And obviously, in addition to that, if you do have an increase you have a baseline, and I'll go through more of the detail, but if you have a baseline and then you increase in the first year, you then get the ecological outcome verification certificate, which then gives you access to the sealed stamp for land to market, which is the supply chain that there are various projects that might be relevant. And also it's a marketing label and seal that you can then use as well on any product to any market that you have. So the indicators for our monitoring, there's live canopy, living organisms, warm season, cool season, like we're looking at diversity of plants, We're looking at a canopy that can break the fall of a raindrop to actually make sure that it takes the energy out of the raindrop and falls into the soil. We've got trees and shrubs because we want that diversity in the landscape of vegetation. And we also, we have these are the rare species, or the undesirable species, which are more of your pioneer species, or some might like to call them weeds. The litter abundance, so whether or not we've got ground cover, that's also for making sure that the water is going in and not running off. And then also dung decomposition, so are we cycling the nutrients? Is our mineral cycle functioning? And we're monitoring the bare soil. We're also looking at the wind erosion and water erosion, just to ensure that we're making sure that we're keeping as much water in as possible, and we're not losing things to wind. So ultimately, this is like a paddock, after 10 paddocks, so a baseline would have 10 paddocks potentially. This is just a sample of what might look like. So the water cycle, and then the index of that is actually over the 10 paddocks. So this is only one paddock at a time. So the water cycle in one paddock, the mineral cycle in one paddock are the blue and the orange. The energy flow in one paddock, and it's between 2018 and 2019. And so is the community dynamics. But then when you have a look at all the 10 paddocks that are monitored, we then get this kind of a function analysis in this pink column. So that's just a snapshot of you know, some of the things that we pull it, like the EOV process pulls up for people. So the steps are, you register your interest, you get a baseline, and that's a short-term and long-term, and that's the first year. And then every year after that, you do a short-term going forward, and then every 5 years we do another long-term. So to actually just see if we've sort of those longer-term, you know, you are actually improving longer-term. And then every 5 years, as I said, the long-term. So then it's an ongoing annual activity that you participate in. But what it's doing is actually giving you a check to see if whether what you are doing in the paddock and the management decisions you're making and the practices that you are actually implementing are actually moving you towards what you would like your land to look like and in your context, and actually improving your landscape function. And so once you have actually had that improvement, as I mentioned, you're then accessing that land to market supply chain. You have access to that land to market supply chain. And it's a recognition of your management, the EOV, and it allowing you to say, well, it's a big deal, and it's actually a really good thing to you know, to have that. And also, if you are direct marketing, it's a really, you know, it's an add-on to you to add to your story about the land in which your food is coming from is regenerating. And improving, and that's a pretty important part, because we can all, you know, we can go and talk to people at farmers markets and everything, and we can find out, you know, what's going on. But if their land is like, if they can say that their land is also, and they've got a verification that their land is improving, then that's a very much an added component to their marketing story, but also actually the genuine management of their property. And I think that's, and it means that we're moving away from the greenwashing, and this is actually verifying that it is actually, the land is improving. And so then to move on from that to the actual, you know, in ESG component. So we were talking about supply chains. Well, I know that there's a scope 3 that's coming in that is actually asking companies to know about their supply chain and actually have, you know, give answers and report on that, the impact of their supply chain, of whether or not it's with the supply chain of the inputs for their resources to make what they're making, or the supply chain that they're operating in to get their product to market. So it's a really, so this is actually helping that supply chain. And the example of that UGG boot, the Decker's UGG boot example, is that, you know, they've come to us, they're supporting farmers who have the crossbred animals that they're looking for skins, and then we're putting together the supply chain in Australia, and it means that Deckers then can actually say that they have helped monitor, they help landholders monitor, and the skins that they are getting are from land that is EOV and accredited. So, and that means that the land is improving from the management, even with animals on it, which is clearly an outcome that holistic management supports, because animals are critical in our dry tending environments to cycle the carbon and put it back into a form that the soil microbes can use. So properly managed livestock are critical in restoring our grasslands in that regard. But what this does is it just brings that component in to say that we're not only connecting the farmers to their supply chain, but their land that is improving in their land function is now is being rewarded for and acknowledged and accepted into supply chain. So I think that's part of that whole ESG reporting for companies, is really having that connection right through to landholders for food and fibre. And so then to go on to, I think we've covered off the environment side and how the EOV adds to the ESG. And I think with the holistic decision making in itself is actually where we really enhance the social and the governance side of things. So the social element is the decision makers. So because we in holistic management, we actually identify what we're managing and who we're managing. And so so what the entity is managing, and we include the decision makers, the people, the resources, and the money sources. And so that gives us our what the entity that we're managing, and that's really great for our linear brain, because it gives us a boundary in which what is being managed and where the money is coming from, who the people we need to consider are, and the resources we've got available to make this entity fly. So that's a really powerful part of the process. And also then we develop the holistic context, and that includes your values and the vision or the future that's required. So that in itself is drawing from all the people involved what they value and what their preferred future, or the future that they would prefer to see, needs to encompass. And that description of the attributes of that preferred future are included in the context as part of the holistic context. Then we have in the decision tool, which is more of the governance process because it's the decision making, but I just wanted to flag that actually in that, one of the big questions is social weak link. You know, are we, you know, will this action offend anyone that we need whose support that we need? And so the people are important in this, and that's where we go back to that entity, that whole under management, or that summary of what we are managing, because we then think about the people that influence us and people who are influenced by us. And so we consider them in our decision. And so they're absolutely linked to the social component of the ESG. And then the governance is, again, using the context of the values and the vision to actually make decisions towards. So we're making sure that we are moving towards how we say we need our life to be, and or the organisation needs to be. And then also that future, that really important, how that future must be. So we have a decision tool, and that checks, so it checks for people, the environment and prosperity, but it also checks our head. So what's a good idea? You know, what do we think and what do we feel? So our heart, what do we feel? And then it also checks the root cause. So we actually ask the question, are we solving the root cause of the problem? It also talks about the present and the future. So it's checking the present and the future as well. So the actual decision tool covers off and it makes sure that each option that we're checking is moving us towards that context that we've identified. And then very importantly, after we've made a decision, we have a built-in monitoring. So we're asking the question, okay, what's the first sign that we could be off track here? Like, what can we monitor to ensure that we can incrementally monitor so that we have an early sign? You know, and we all know that an aeroplane is off course 98% of the time. It's only the little tiny corrections that the pilots make to the coordinates that ensure that we actually get off where we want to get off. And so it's a bit like that in business and our farms and in organisations, just to make sure we've got that early monitoring built in. And that's what this process allows. And then to go on to that, the actual reporting. So at the moment, I'm pretty, you know, been talking to a few organizations, and it's very much isolationist. So it's like, we'll do a social report because that sits over there in the HR, and we might do an environment, which is more operations and whatever, and then the finance is in the finance department. But they're actually separate reports. Whereas if we're actually using the holistic process, we can actually, and through this decision-making process, we can actually create the report that actually has the people, environment, and that longer-term prosperity, or the finances, that governance, environment, social, and governance, actually reported on every decision we make. And so every decision could be every decision has that built into it. And so that means then the reporting is fantastic, because it means that you've actually got examples of how the organization or the entity is delivering on those ESG principles and those ESG areas. So that, I think, is that will make a big difference in regards to the quality of the ESGs, but also, more importantly, the actual activity on the ground, so that it's genuine. It's not actually just, we just ticked a box and we've done something about that. You've actually got decisions that you're using this, and always checking the ESG for every decision just through the process, which then means that you can genuinely say, hand on heart, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And this has been the outcome. This is what all the things we've put in place that represent our ESG contribution. So I think that was all I had, and I'm happy to answer questions. Oh, there you go. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Helen. That was fantastic. And I'll leave it. We've got some questions in the chat. Perhaps if you wanted to start with some of those.
Yeah, sure.
And then if I'll let you choose, Helen, if you just, people can put their hands up and then you can throw to them rather than me jumping in.
Yeah, no, sure. That's fine. I'll just check where we start. Okay. I think, where might a microbial cycle fit within the four? Yeah, so it's actually the result. So it's actually in the mineral cycle. The microbial cycle is actually in the soil, which is the mineral cycle. And also the community dynamics. So because they're all connected, it's very hard to, the microbial cycle is an overlay of the community dynamics and the mineral cycle. So if we've got a highly functioning mineral cycle, we're going to have lots of communication, because we're releasing nutrients, because it's cycling so well. We're then going to have lots of activity with that microbial community as well. So that's why that's where that fits. And how do we increase biodiversity in locked up state forests? So, I mean, this is where, depending on if it's in a brittle tending, seasonal dry environment, that's where I think we could be utilising animals. We can be actually cycling the carbon and actually using that and cycling that material and rejuvenating those areas with that, because there's a lack of moisture. And so the only tool we've got available to bring that moisture in those non-growing season or that dry period is in the gut of the animal. So they're a very valid tool and well managed. And even if it is only in the dry season that they're in the actual state forests, we could actually, I think we'd see a marked improvement in the biodiversity and just the functioning of those ecosystem processes in our state forests. Yeah, so that one paddock versus, I've really just pulled that, and I probably need to, I'm getting myself across the monitoring reporting. So that one paddock versus, so it's really just saying 2018 was this for your mineral cycle, 2019 was this for your mineral cycle, and then because of the way in which we monitor, which is 3 on average, people's baseline are 3 long-term and 10 short-term. Those 10 short-term then are averaged out over that, and that then gives them that index. That's what that pink column is talking about. Okay, I hope that sort of cleared that up a bit. So, and then and how are the achievements audited? So the actual on-farm monitoring, so people go out and actually monitor it, and they have those indicators to tick off and check and assess. and then they're loaded up to the Savoury Institute platform. And there's an EO, we have verifiers and that verify the data. We have EOV QA that also check the data. So it's actually, it goes through about 2 different layers. And then the actual report is done by a master verifier. And so there's sort of 3 layers that are actually ensuring that the data actually makes sense with things. So from the actual land base and all the maps. And so that report then goes to the farmer to then allow them to decide what kind of changes they might make to management this year to get better outcomes. That's the ultimate intention of it. And then what are the setup and ongoing costs? Sure. So on average, 3 long-term, and these are very ballpark figures because it's very much individually priced. But look, on an average, 3 long-term, 10 short terms for your baseline is about $4,500, and then ongoing is around that $2,000. So it's just really making sure, because they're after the baseline, you do short term, and then you have another 5. At 5 years, you've got another long-term monitoring, which is that larger amount, which is that $4,500. So it's over that period. But so that's the pricing of it, and I guess it's actually about the knowing what you're doing and why you're doing it, and how maybe you can improve that, and also recording whether or not what you did last year got you the results you wanted, and whether or not you need to tweak what that was or completely change what you're doing. So it really does give you kind of it puts you back in the steering wheel a bit, behind the steering wheel, about your own landscape function and what you're doing, because you're really being able to hone in on your results and make those changes.
Helen, I'll just jump in before you go to the next question, because we've had a bit of a follow-up question to that one.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Does the size of the property affect the setup and ongoing costs very much?
Yeah, so it's this ecosystem region, the eco region, but also the soil type. So it does a little bit, because it depends on how many soil types you have, because they want to put monitoring sites in the various soil types. So that will determine pricing and things like that as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's very much context. It's very much regionally. It's in the eco-region context, rather than just it's not a blanket one size fits all, which is a good thing, because nature's dynamic. So it's a good thing. And okay, so we've got you mentioned farmers markets and ag boots, but any major process of export chain on board? Yeah, so this is an area of growth for us. We're really wanting to improve the knowledge and awareness of the EOV process, but also the land to market brand. And it's certainly becoming more known, but it's an area of growth for us, and that's exactly right. We want to actually build more of a domestic understanding and awareness of the land to market brand. So definitely required. Yep. And yeah, no, so the actual verification is actually on not just grazing animals, it is on grassland predominantly. There is some talk about some forestry work, but I think they've really just tried to get good at this wider grassland areas. So the free range pig operation would absolutely be included in that, and just whatever you're doing on the landscape, and you can check that it's moving and improving. So does the EOV supply the methods to determine the state of the indicators? No, the EOV, we monitor the state of the indicators. So we monitor that. That's the part of the monitoring, is doing that baseline and actually monitoring the state of the indicators. And then that then is verified, and then your results are submitted. And if you've got an increase in your ecological health index, then you are actually given the certificate from EOV QA in the States. So, and what we're doing is it's actually ultimately the farmer owns their data at all times. And so the only way in which the data is ever used is if there's some aggregated, as in just trends of practices and matching practices with outcomes and various things, but very much about the individual farmer improving their own landscape function. It's not, there's no sharing of any of the data to anyone. Viticulture, I would have to get back to you on that. I'm not sure if we've, there is actually some EOV wineries. So yes, so it does actually, because it's a land function, you can absolutely get EOV on in a winery as well. So that's no problem. Yep, that's right. Yes, I am saying we should be grazing state forests with sheep and cattle or livestock, but well managed. Time, not numbers, and for a short period of time, and getting out and letting the area recover. So, yep, I am saying that would be a great management tool to help with and reduce fire load of our state forests. Yeah, in dry seasonal environments, absolutely. So yeah, thanks, Jill. The yeah, so I think the biodiversity, as you're alluding to, that we do have two markets, so the carbon market and the biodiversity market is coming, and I understand that that will be kind of finalised next year. It's in the government process at the moment, and I certainly if the market instruments are of something that is actually moving you towards what you want in your business, and you want to do that, I think that the EOV's role in that is really about just simply letting you know that you are moving in that direction. At this point in time, we're not connecting any carbon trading to this process. However, it certainly allows you to get a baseline of where your ecological function is. And you remember, when we talk about those ecosystem processes, those 4 ecosystem processes, if they are functioning, highly functioning, then they're creating the right conditions for carbon and biodiversity. If they're not functioning, then you're not going to get that growth in your soil carbon. And and I guess what we're looking at, we do a soil test, it's actually carbon sequestration of the 30 centimeters of actual functional carbon in your soil profile. It's not measuring that deeper stored carbon, which is sort of 50 centimeters below or below. But what it's saying to you is that if you are actually seeing a functioning cycle, then there's good chance that you are actually putting that carbon into the soil further down as well. So it's an indicator for you before you maybe go down that path of carbon trading, just to understand how well your soil is actually functioning and your landscape's functioning.
Well done, Helen. You're doing a good job. There's plenty of questions.
Okay, the site's a holistic forest. Okay.
That might be more of a comment, I think.
Yeah, great. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I answered Joe's is the question I sort of did a bit of a follow-up on while you were still talking about the costs.
Yeah.
So I think we're up to Caroline.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks. No, look, I don't think it's ever too early, because anyway, like getting in early and getting that baseline, it means that then at least you've got a checkpoint every year to say whether or not what you're doing is moving you towards what you want in your holistic context. So I think that's a really good option, Carolyn, if that's in line with your context and you feel like you're ready for it. There's 2 prongs to this. It's actually about that really a feedback from your management, and it's like holding up a mirror every year saying, oh, how did I go this year? And it's also then, if you want to then pursue that land to market, access to the land to market supply chain, that's also an option. But right now that land to market is really a Decas project in Australia. We are developing developing that supply chain. And I can see those land to market projects becoming, there will be more of those land to market projects. But, to me, the importance of the EOV certificate that you get is also just as important, because that's indicating to you that you're improving your landscape function. And that's what I'm really keen to ensure. Like, that's the growth area I mentioned before, is that we want to actually have that recognised in the wider consumer and buyer market in Australia, to understand that this is actually verifying that the food and fibre is from land that's restoring. So there's that too. There is a marketing element, but there's also just a pure management element too, which is really valuable. And who goes out and monitors, and I guess, sometimes people do talk about making sure that we outsource what we're not going to do ourselves. And history would indicate and suggest that farmers aren't really that excited about monitoring. And so this is a service that offers that and ticks that box for you, so that you can actually make some better management decisions. So Tim and Courtney, so that's the area that also is being developed. I mean, I think the reports to date have probably been quite they're quite involved, and so part of my role is to make sure that, and we're mapping out that whole journey in the next few weeks and months, and we're just going to try and really improve that information that farmers get back to help with that implementation of the of those changes of management and practices that you want to put in place, to see if that's going to make the improvement you want. So those reports, we really want to unpack those reports for people and develop that process of doing that. So it's certainly the growth area. And the likely income. So the income of the EOV certification, I'm not sure if we've got, I'm not sure at the moment, the marketing, the land to markets, there's sort of no premium built in. However, it is about you knowing that all your efforts to keep the landscape and you're improving the landscape function is actually going through a supply chain that is true and has integrity for your values and your vision for your land. And so there's a it's a value of integrity in there, and it means that all the work you've done, you're then ensuring that your product is kept clean and is going to customers that actually want that as well. So that's the element of that, and it's also the benefit of the management tips and tricks that the way in which to improve management to get better outcomes. I think ultimately there will, if the demand for product that is coming from land that's regenerating and or restoring and their function, and people and consumers who want to actually buy products like that, I feel that there will be additional value in, like, financial value in the supply chain, but it's very immature at the moment. So another, an area that we'll have to see how that plays out. But, supply and demand could make that a reality. And again, it is an immature situation at the moment. So
it's a bit like everyone, isn't it, Helen, with measuring ESGs or natural capital. You've really got to find your market that gives you a premium for that, or you're doing it because you're seeing the benefits in the turn on off product that you're doing, the benefits of improved soil in your cattle, for example, or something like that. But yeah, it's a hopefully, that there will be some greater market incentives for this sort of thing, but it's unique to every sort of farm and product, I would say.
Yeah, that's right. And what the drivers are for each enterprise. And Jenny, you'll make it, that's a really interesting point or question. I think that's you could certainly, if you think that there is you can certainly have your land verified, and that L2M, and it's almost like a business to business, isn't it? So it's not business to consumer, it's a business to business with Seed Stock Stud. So if you think that other businesses, like other ag businesses, would be interested that your your seed stock are on land that's regenerating, and that's important to pass them on to that, then it absolutely. But again, it's about your context and what you want for your business and how important it is for you. Yeah, great. Thanks, Leanne, for sharing that. That's good. Yep. Okay. I don't have any. I think this is really interesting. The whole grazing thing. I love it. So I think this whole notion of whether or not we have long recoveries or short recoveries, or it's actually about where you're at. I believe that the holistic management RCS 101 of grazing is a really great place to start. So, plan your grazing, go in and make sure, and in holistic management, we're checking that in our growing season, that we're getting maximum, that we're checking that we monitor the rate of the growth of the grass. So we're making sure that we're aware of our recovery period based on what's actually happening. And so that rate of the growth of the grass in a growing season will give us a minimum and a maximum graze period. So definitely do a basic grazing and give that and get really competent with that really core grazing element of recovery in a growing season, and then budgeting out that feed in a non-growing season, and managing your grazing with time, not numbers, and getting onto that. So that definitely step one is to get that under your belt and have a good few years of that, and monitoring that and making sure you don't get into a system, making sure that you don't go through the same gate the same time every year, and you don't go the same direction, all those changes, but that's all covered in those courses. Then I think that there's a variety of other ideas out there. And some of you would have heard of Graham Hand and Dick Richardson. They're both offering really interesting, dynamic or different versions of, and just upping the ante on this grazing tool, the tool of grazing. And we have found that a few people have hit that nature wall, if you like, and because they've been managing that grazing, and then they've sort of seen that nature's stopped responding. So you then have to change it up. And, Dick Richardson says, nature responds to events. So let's create an event with something different and change. And if we want a different outcome, we have to do something differently, and change equals change. So I think there's a bit of dynamic there, but it comes down to really having your fundamental understanding of that grazing planning through time and not numbers, and holistic management, the holistic decision making, holistic grazing planning, and then really monitoring that and just seeing what responses you're getting. And when you start to see the responses sort of starting to plateau, then maybe it's time for you then to go in to have a look at some of these other ideas that are being innovated. And it's a very exciting. It's exciting because it's giving people lots of options of what they'd like to try, of something different to try to get the outcome.
Thank you so much, Helen. We're coming to the end now, so I appreciate everyone's time, and it's been really informative and lovely that we got through a lot of the questions. There is still a few more, and for those of you that might have thought of something later, I see Helen's got her email up there, so I'm sure she wouldn't mind.
I'm also happy to stay on. If you want to stay on, I'm happy to stay on and answer them.
Oh, okay, yep, that's good then. Well, we can do it. Yep. So if anyone does need to head off, then thank you very much for coming. Really appreciate it. And just quickly, FCA is running so obviously Farmers for Climate Action is a charity, and we have have been chosen by Ethical Jobs this week that they will match any donations. So if anyone feels like donating a few dollars or anything like that for the next 24 hours, we're being matched. So that's why I had to make sure I got that in this webinar as well. But I'll pass over to you, Helen, and I might I'll just keep recording for another couple of minutes, and then I'll stop it, and we can see if there's any questions left you can keep answering, or not. Just so that because this will go up on our YouTube channel, and we'll send it out to everyone that registered that couldn't make it. So thank you very much, guys.
Okay, great. No worries. Thank you. Very good. Thanks for everyone. It was great to have your company. Okay, so then Alina, I run free range cattle on marginal regrowth forest country, creek flats, building a soil grazing network, okay, plan managed land better. Yep, they do far. Yeah. Yep. Yes. Oh dear. Well, again, it's about your context. I mean, what you want to be doing, how you want to be spending your time, and Eleanor, and just really working out what that actually include, like what would that actually mean, and are you going to be making money from it? Those are the things, and then all the parameters around that in regards to rules and regulations, etc. But it ultimately becomes a decision for you to make towards the picture of your landscape you want and your values and how you want to spend your time. So that's probably the best way to approach that, I think. And so Graham Hand was the other name to Dick Richardson. So both of them are offering very different grazing tools or grazing approaches, but both worth looking at if that's what you want to do. And thanks for the links. Do we get to save the chat so we can keep some of those links, Ellen? Yeah, so James.
Yeah, I think we can. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So James, yeah, so the actual physical monitoring is done with the farmer, with the monitor. So you're part of that process. So you're there seeing and being part of the monitoring process. So that's a key part of this, is to ensure that the farmer is absolutely included and part of the monitoring that we're doing.
Just to follow up on that. So is that also the case, like working through the kind of holistic context and the kind of the things other than the paddock monitoring, someone's working with you, or you kind of get given like a sheet to work through? Or
okay. So yeah, James, the EOV process is really focused on the monitoring, and the monitor will come out and do that monitoring. I'm hearing what you're saying, and that's an area of where we're developing, of actually having this training to go with this, and have access to that training so that you can then get that holistic management training under your belt as well. Okay, so it's an area that we know we need to improve or allow, enable actually. So there's definitely room for that to be included in some form. And we're creating a light version for some of the people in the Deckers project, and so that's under development at the moment. But yeah, thank you for that, because it's good to know that might be of interest to people as well. So thanks, James. Yeah, good. Excellent. Oh, that's great. All right, good. Anyone else? Okay, yeah, please. If Frank, if you'd like to talk to call me. Just my number and everything's on the screen. So please just give me a call or email me. That'd be great. I'm really keen to chat. Good. I think we're done. Thanks. Anything else?
Lovely. Thank you so much, Helen. That was fantastic.
That's good.
Yeah, I'm so glad everyone's really enjoyed it, and thank you all for hanging around. It's been great, and a lot of really good questions, and that's why we do these sort of smaller webinars every now and again, so that people can get a chance to be a bit more interactive. And I find that often people are asking, someone's thinking it and a lot of other people are asking it, so that's really good. And a lot of practical questions about how they doing an EOV on their farm, which is really good. So lovely. All right, thank you so much, everyone. I will close it up, and really appreciate it. If any of you are doing some really exciting things on farm with working in this space, we're always looking for new farmer in focuses. So you can see other farmer in focus articles on our Farmers for Climate Action website. They're just a really great way to get these good stories of farmers that are really looking after the land, being proactive, out to the wider public that often think that we perhaps are not doing the best things by our land. So yeah, feel free to get in touch. I'll put my email in the chat, as well as you've probably get it in your inboxes more frequently than you'd like anyway. All right. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Ellen. Bye-bye.